Drill Sergeant. Another nugget for a fiery trial. A jewel being collected by God. We've been talking about fleshly versus spiritual weapons. Drill number 4. The futility of the flesh. This is Paul talking to us again. Number 4. The futility of the flesh. We come to this next point in this verse where Paul continues, "For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal." The word carnal is taken from the word sarkos, which is the Greek word for flesh. By electing to use this word, Paul tells us that real spiritual weapons do not come from the flesh realm. As a matter of fact, Paul takes a hard stand on this subject. He emphatically declares that spiritual weapons have absolutely nothing to do with the flesh or the activity of the flesh. Though Paul lived, functioned, and walked in the flesh, just like we do today, he did not fall back upon the flesh or fleshly techniques. When it came to defeating spiritual adversaries, in order to reinforce the victory which Jesus won at the cross and the resurrection, it would require that Paul move in spiritual weapons. Flesh can fight flesh, but flesh is no match for the spirit realm. Even though Paul was extremely educated, his education was no match for the devil. Neither was his marvelous and genius mind a match for the devil. His notoriety, as well known as he was as a Christian leader, did not scare or impress the devil. His manner of speech and his vocal style of preaching were not wonderful enough to rid him of the devil's assaults. Regardless of how good the flesh looks or how loud the flesh roars, it was never intended to fight a spiritual foe. Thus, the reason that God has so graciously given us spiritual weapons, such as the loin belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shoes of peace, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, and the lance of intercession. Without these, we stand naked and defenseless before the adversary. They're weak and silly weapons of the flesh. Yet there are many believers today who are using outward, physical, bodily, fleshly techniques in their attempt to defeat the work of the adversary in their lives and to do so-called spiritual warfare. These outward, physical, bodily, fleshly techniques are not what struggling believers need. These will eventually become a new form of legalism in your lives, which means in addition to fighting real strongholds, which the devil has sown in their minds, they will also have to fight with the feelings of condemnation for not gaining victory through the so-called techniques that they have been taught or that has been taught to them. Rather than rest in the redemptive work of Jesus Christ and use the weapons that are provided in Scripture, Ephesians 6:13 through 18, they move over into a mode of spiritual warfare that is totally foreign to any teaching of the New Testament, where they must do additional things in order to free themselves from the devil's control. This new legalism of doing so-called spiritual things in order to obtain freedom has painfully come to the forefront of many spirit-filled groups in recent years. I feel this strategy or this tragedy deeply in my heart, for I too am a spirit-filled believer and am primarily called of God to minister to such like-minded people. Therefore, when I see sincere people swallowed up in works of the flesh that in reality add nothing to their freedom, it grieves me deeply. Yet there are many believers today who are using fleshly weapons and techniques to do so-called spiritual warfare. I cannot help but sorrow for those dear spirit-filled believers who are constantly, habitually trying to set themselves free from demon possession when Jesus has already set them free. I feel sorry for that group of Christians who in recent years have revived an old Gnostic era, which teaches they must deliver themselves from demonic control by deliberately making themselves vomit continually, week after week, as though vomiting alone would somehow remove demonic powers. And it is saddening to see so many physically abusing their bodies and hurting their throats with the new teaching that is gaining acceptance today called warring tongues. What are warring tongues? Some think that by screaming, screeching, and violently praying in throat-ripping, loud prayer, they exert more power against the devil. Some even teach that if you pray quietly, then you might as well find something better to do with your time. In their distorted view, prayer exerts no spiritual power unless it is done loudly and is ear-deafening. Somehow they believe their authority is attached to the volume of their voice. When dealing with the devil, the issue is not the sound level or volume of your voice. The devil is not afraid of noise. Remember, he has created all kinds of horrendous, loud, screaming music during our time. Noise obviously does not bother the devil. A policeman doesn't yell and scream to stop a crime. He simply pulls out his gun and waves it in front of the offender. There's no need for the policeman to scream, yell, and holler. All the screaming in the world wouldn't stop the offender. That officer's gun, on the other hand, carries great authority, and it's sometimes misused and sometimes misguided. With that gun in hand, he can whisper to the offender, and the offender many times will gladly obey. Likewise, it is the authority of one's spirit that causes the devil to obey. If you know who you are in Jesus Christ and know how to use that Christ-imparted authority against him, you can whisper ever so faintly to the devil, and he will flee. The issue is not the sound level or volume of your voice, but the authority contained in your spirit. The whole idea of screaming violently in tongues is that because the heavenlies are full of demonic powers, and because we are physically under that dark demonic cloud, we must therefore attempt to pierce the heavenlies with our loud screaming noises and try to break our way through that hellish barrier. Therefore, sincere brothers and sisters, are led to believe they must scream violently in tongues at the devil for hours on end, day after day, week after week, in order to gain freedom from their personal lives. Having heard of these things, I personally thought that this message tonight would be something you would like to know about. Weak and silly weapons of the flesh. Another nugget for a fiery trial. A jewel being collected by God. Drill sergeant.